Okay, so yeah, I'm Dave Darby. This is Simon Grant and Ollie Bream McIntosh. We're going to introduce this session, then we'll go into breakout rooms, and then we'll report back. So we're here because we want change and new kind of economy, and the vocabulary of this new kind of economy is complicated. We're inviting you to discuss this here. How can we make this more accessible for a wider audience? That's the main thing. So this session is about three things. It's about the building blocks of this new economy, or whatever it's called. At the very least, we can say it's a better economy. The language we use to identify and talk about those building blocks, and indeed about the economy, and a commons resource where that language can live. Accessibility is really important if we want to reach as many people as possible rather than just talking to ourselves. And we must have all being daunted by the inaccessibility of certain terms at some point in our lives. No one's born understanding what commons-based peer production means, or what extraction means, or what a platform co-op is. But we've all persevered, and so we've all ended up here. And so we know how hard it is. So let's make it easier for people. Let's become the mainstream. So we want to discuss some of those terms today, and after that, starting tomorrow, there's ongoing work to develop an ontology of a new world, whatever that new world is called. But we can't carry on with this one. And these conversations will feed into ongoing work, and it is and will continue to be quite messy and difficult and controversial. And actually, we've already had quite a few ding-dongs already just to get to this point. And so you are all part of this. Your ideas can feed into this new ontology, which can feed into the building of something new. And God knows we need something new. Over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Dave. Lovely. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, so just to explain a bit of the process, how we've got here. We had a volunteer working group, and we made a list. We invited everybody to make a list of all the terms that we could think of that needed clarification, particularly with this conference in mind, but also for the wider job of building what we all want to build together. Some of us then chose which ones we believed were most important for this conference, and the outcome was just 13 of them were chosen by 3 out of the 4 of us, and you'll see that list shortly. So this is the beginnings of what some people call a democratic. I prefer to call it a consensus-oriented process, because we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. Obviously, if we want to enable communication and collaboration, then we need to be as inclusive as we can be, and make sure that we're not just still perpetuating jargon or division in terms of how we speak to each other. So really what we want to do here is to give people a taster and to entice people and motivate them to join in our project, which is going to be a long haul. And I think the last point I want to make really is how we do this is really important. If we do this in a top-down, dare I say, patriarchal way, if we use the old organization patterns to do it, we'll just get a language which perpetuates the old system, and we don't want that. So even worse, actually, think of if the older people will remember Orwell's 1984 and Newspeak, and that shows you as an image of how language controls people's minds. So we want to do much, much better than that. And I think the practices for the day are ones which I'm sure some of you are very familiar with or getting familiar with. We want to make sure that in our sessions, in our little breakout sessions, we listen actively, reflectively to each other. We understand and empathize with different people's positions and motivations, where they're coming from. And we want to develop this language so that we're working towards a language that works well enough for everybody to communicate and be heard. And in order to do that, we reckon that we need to keep the little groups in which we talk, keep them small, so that we can really hear each other and be heard and have space to be heard, 3 to 5 people. And over to Ollie.
Yep, I'm Ollie. Hi, everyone. I'm going to explain kind of how the rest of the session is going to unfold. We're going to be in breakout groups, as I think both Dave and Simon mentioned. I'm going to try and explain in a bit more detail the purpose of these breakout groups, and then how they're going to work practically as well. So they really have quite a few purposes, actually. What we're really trying to do here, first of all, is give an introduction to the idea of building this ontology, or this set of building blocks and their relationships, what we're trying to do here, how and why we're trying to do it. It's also a same paging exercise. This whole thing started in a Lumio thread where we were exploring the need for a form of glossary, so we're not locking people out of conversations with technical economic jargon, and also to avoid misunderstandings between those who already feel comfortable with the terms but might have a slight subtle difference of approach. It's also an opportunity for us to practice what we preach. As Simon said, it's all well and good talking about the building blocks and criteria of a better economy and the language we use to label it and talk about it, but it's no good if we're not putting it into practice when we get the chance. So things like common ownership, co-creation, participation, deliberation, listening, tick-tacking towards consensus, open source software. We want to try and live those things in this group today as well, rather than just trying to find them. Also a call to action, as well. As it stands, we're mostly men, all white, and from the global north and western, and I would hazard a guess as well that our average age is over twice mine, and it goes without saying why these characteristics mean that we are incomplete as a group seeking to serve the common interest, no matter how earnestly diversity has got to be a part of those set of those building blocks as well. So lastly, if you don't fancy contributing to a working group in the long run, the collaborative notes you jot down in these sessions will ultimately help inform the group's subsequent efforts, whatever direction they will take. Without you, we've already come in, as Dave said, had a few, ding-dongs perhaps, but differences of opinion, which have been really generative and really interesting conversations. And it just seems like, the wisdom of the crowd is the most natural way to, and the most economically appropriate in this context way to get past those. So breakout spaces. As Simon said, we've whittled it down from, I think, over 100 in the end. It was 115 in the total list. And we did this process. We got down to 13. We're going to have one breakout space for each term, each building block. Bearing in mind, these are just sample terms, and they're very, very likely to change as we go through the process in the long run. I'm actually going to read them out in case anyone is wrestling with websites and tabs and links, as I sometimes find myself doing. So they are, in alphabetical order: co-creation, the commons, commons-based peer production, community-supported agriculture, co-ops, discos, free and open source software, generative or regenerative economy, murmurations and related terms like API and client, mutual credit, platform co-op, Preston model, and token economic systems. And you can find a list of those, I think, in the document that Simon has either posted shortly or either will post shortly or has already.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you're back. Can we just say those pads are open and will stay open? Please feel free to visit any of the pads and just make suggestions or alterations.
It's funny that you should mention the word ontology, Ollie, because if we're talking about accessibility to as many people as possible, then ontology is possibly a difficult word. It sort of means, a collection of concepts and the relationships between those concepts. I always thought there must be a more accessible way of saying that, not just saying that. What do people think about the word ontology?
It's very unhelpful.
Got a clear downvote from Laura there, thank you.
I suggest we don't use it from here on.
Any ideas about a different word or a different phrase?
The word German. Why do we need to talk about it? I don't know. It's the stuff that's inside it that's important.
Is on this subject of ontology, what did you experience or learn over this session? Okay, so would somebody like to contribute their experience of this last and think about ontology and what ontology means to you, and do you have something to contribute, either from the conversation that you had, whether it was difficult or not, but also, or if you like, about the term itself, and let's see what we can still extract from this. Anybody like? Yeah. Hi, Laura. Unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi. So I think we had quite a good conversation, and what really it brought home to me was the usefulness of crowdsourcing the ideas around these terms, partly because I was bringing in a different term, slightly different to the one we were discussing, which was community-supported agriculture. I got muted somehow. Anyway, it was nice to hear some different perspectives on the terminology, both whether or not that was the right term and different interpretations of it. So I think this crowdsourcing way of exploring these in discussion, and hopefully now in the pads, seems really constructive. And there'll be some really interesting challenges to try to collate all of that into useful definitions that help people while still reflecting the diversity of opinions and ideas.
Did you come up with a simpler term, Laura? Is that where it went?
So I've been working on a project which has a slightly different term, and we intentionally position ourselves away from community-supported agriculture, which was the term in use. So I wouldn't say it was simpler, just different.
All right, so that's Francesca's point of disaggregating. Somebody else like to contribute thought? Gary, hi.
The overall ontology conversation has been mooted on the various email and other lists up to now, and what I was looking for is the idea that we all have a fairly reasonably formed common vision, which Ali summarized in his opening at about an hour ago very nicely. I don't think this is a sort of random, just picking out odd political points from here and there. I think it can be, we can go back to very first basic principles and generate the whole thing. So, sense of identity, I'm a human who's part of life on Earth, and for me to live effectively, it works if we're collaborative, because that's the kind of beings we are. And building up from very basic principles the logic of the entire edifice of our overall new vision. So it's clear and coherent overall, and it's not just, oh yes, we believe in collaboration, we're not neoliberals, and yay, us, boo, neoliberals. It's getting it back to first principles. That's what I thought this ontology conversation was going to be about. Can people hear me? Am I making sense? I'll mute myself.
We can hear you. We can hear you. Thanks, okay. Gary. I think that Gary, you've almost contradicted Francesca's point of the more you look into it, the more complex it is. So these are two positions, I think, that maybe could be usefully seen alongside each other in a murmuration. Does anybody else like to contribute something to that? Whether or not you agree with what Gary was saying, that it is actually much simpler than it looks, or maybe go with what Francesca was saying earlier on, that it's more complex than it looks. Sam?
Yeah, so kind of to hop off that, we have like more in common than we are different, and in the fact that we're all here. I was in the murmurations group thing, and we all kind of didn't know what murmurations were, and we were hoping to learn from others in the group. But one thing we got to talking about is maybe creating a agreement of a certain tech stack that the engineers who are interested in building platform co-ops could use, so that would enable greater collaboration between teams if we all don't have to be learning new technologies all the time.
Thanks, Sam. That sounds like a good proposal. Matthew?
I was in room 12 around the Preston model. But just, I'm just thinking about the ontology thing. About someone said, we all know what the common interest is, and just the difference between having an S after the commons interest as opposed to a common interest. The common interest, we're making this language between a demographic which is already, quite limited in a way, and so there might be different kinds of interests. Maybe the commons is a number of different interests, and it needs a different way of thinking around. Because with the Preston model, the thing we came to was that when we're talking about a model, we're always abstracting, and so we say, what's the common principle? But actually, Preston is it's a specific place that has specific ways of doing and knowledge, vernacular to that place. And so, even though it's useful to think of a model, it may not be useful if you think you can just apply it somewhere else as it is. And this kind of difference between abstracted knowledge and vernacular knowledge and different ways of approaching this, I think we need to kind of, if we really want to be a commons-based, where we're trying to meet all the needs of different communities, particularly ethnic minorities and so on, which have a different language and a different way of understanding their place, then we might need to broaden away from just one common interest or defining we have a common interest.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. I mean, it suggests that there's a lot of learning that could be done if there was a commitment to that, and I think that's what Sam was suggesting, that there's a learning possibility, but there needs to be a sort of common commitment first to doing that work. Where do we find that common commitment? If we're talking about ourselves, Dave, I think I saw you raise your hand that it's great that we're all here, but are there enough of us here is the question. Did anybody else have a thought they want to contribute to this question? Maybe Ollie, I'm quite curious to Sylvester. Do you have some thought about this pursuit of the ontology and how it's, because you're trying to, you amongst others are building this movement. Do you feel that the ontology is an obstacle, or do you, at the moment, as it stands at the moment, is it an obstacle, or is it a learning moment for as many people as possible?
Sure, I'll just speak to that really quickly because I see Candice and John have both got their hands up and I've probably said enough. But to me, the ontology is like, it's an ugly, difficult word, but basically what I'm talking about is language and terminology. And then there's a second part of this conversation, which for me is the big picture, the world view. And I'll hold up this book here because this book I really loved, and it's by David Bollier and Silke Helfrich, and it has a whole section at the beginning. It's called Free, Fair and Alive, for those that can't see it, and it has a whole section at the beginning which talks about the commons and the language of the commons. And he basically says, they say, we can't expect the language that we're using now, the neoliberal language, to help us produce the world we want. We just simply can't, because language creates meaning and it creates reality, in fact. So that's what this is all about for me. If we want to create a new world, we need new language, plain and simple, and then we need the worldview that springs from that. But that's enough from me. Candice, John.
No, thank you. Well, and I will challenge you not to answer the question, but just to put the question: is a new language, is it inevitably an exclusive language? Will it be new to everyone, or is it, newly common? Candice, I'm sorry I didn't see you put your hand up, and hello, nice to see you.
Oh, you too. I also champion this book, and and chapter 3 goes quite into depth of a whole glossary of terms that they've come up with. But I think that whole experiment in Gathertown was really useful, actually, for all of us to hold in mind the, the accessibility questions which we're facing, in the sense of people who are very passionate and excitedly wanting to get on board systems change, but have this, desperate frustration of how to actually, penetrate it because of the language. And while I really uphold the technical language being really useful so that we can, at the heart of this work, really expedite the change, I think there needs to be a dual, situation where the technical language stands as it is, while we also develop definitions that are more accessible. And looking at that accessible language, I think instead of us, as we've discussed, being quite limited in our demographic, we should just probably take a lot more time looking and listening into communities already embedded in this work and what terms they use, and seeing how we can best, I guess, translate that for our communities. But yeah, I think that's what I'd say.
So thanks very much, Candice. It sounds to me as if you're talking about different speeds can happen at the same time, which is a kind of a murmuration, I guess, and whether or not we can really accept that ourselves. Walter, you wanted to contribute something? I can see that the time is nearly up, but I'll take 2 more. So Walter.
Great. Well, we discussed briefly on platform cooperativism, and one of the challenges that we discussed was the governance models when you have workers, users taken together on the individual level, on the organizational level. Those are different dimensions of challenges that we have to overcome. That the current world vision is just simply you're a customer and you consume it from a provider, and we go beyond that, right? So it's challenging to understand and to propose a good governance model.
Thank you, Walter. John, I'm going to ask you to speak. I was just a little bit distracted by the hand going up in Sam's cat with Sam's cat.
As I've said before in online conversations on Numia and so on, we each view the world through slightly overlapping windows. It amazes me that we can communicate at all. But language is changing around us all the time, and we can't do anything to hold it back. It's like Heraclitus's rivers. We just can't do it. It's co-evolving. And we can't really expect to find a common language, in my opinion. I've become used over the years to having to explain any even slightly ambiguous words, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Language does ramify. We do need to explain our terms in context, and we need to accept that others won't immediately understand what they're saying. And this happens all the time with words we use very commonly: information, value, ontology. It's futile, and I think concerns that some people have about the choice of words, because they can be misrepresented or misappropriated, are really a bit of a red herring. That's going to happen whatever words are chosen. I think we always have to be very careful to define our terms when we use them, and be prepared to stick to our guns, really, rather than lose valuable work that's been done over the decades simply through changing language because we feel we're being forced to. Anyway, that's me.
So I'm very conscious of the time. It's 4 minutes past 11. That was quite a stand to make there, John, at the end, and it's quite controversial. I think we'll be continuing to discuss that over the next couple of days. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Ollie, for the next session.
Thank you very much, Indra, for joining us and hosting us.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.